Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 16th of September 2018. It's a question and answer session. I was hoping to do one of our live sessions. My graphic designer, Casper, helped me set up a really beautiful profile in online broadcaster software, OBS, and I had some computer issues earlier this week, which has resulted in me losing the configuration file. I have all the assets still, so I'm going to have to spend some time getting that set back up. In the meantime, we're just going to do a talking head type of thing here. Also, I'm testing out the Blackmagic Raw on the Ursa Mini Pro here, just since that was released this last week. We'll see how that goes. First question from David. David asks, Saramonic SR VRM1 or Tascam DR-10X plug-on XLR recorders for the Rode Reporter mic. Do either of them have enough clean gain for that mic? I don't know. I've never used either of those two recorders. What I have seen, however, and heard is the Saramonic plug-on recorder. My friend, the Basic Filmmaker, actually used that at NAB this year. So did Dave Andrade. I think that's how you say Dave's last name. I apologize if I got that wrong. His YouTube, I believe, is the Post Color blog. In any case, I will put some links down below after the show here to some of their NAB coverage where they used the Saramonic plug-on recorder. They were using a different dynamic microphone, but they got really nice results. And I found that the Rode Reporter mic doesn't need as much gain as some other similar dynamic microphones, so I think that's probably a good bet there. I don't know if anyone's used the DR-10X and you have experience with that, go ahead and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you on that. Next question is from J.H. Brooks. Please tell us about your workflow for getting the deep richness that is so apparent in your videos. He's talking about audio here. I record with a Zoom F4 and Rode NTG2. I can send sample files. And then I kind of pressed and asked him for more details on how he records. He says, I typically lav each person and I boom the NTG2, and the NTG2 is overhead between them as a backup. Typically they are seated next to each other and the NTG2 is fixed between them on a boom arm about 3 feet away to stay out of the two-slot shot, which is probably part of the problem, and shaded toward the softer speaking person. So yeah, the shotgun, when you place it that far away, you're not generally going to get that really rich low end that it sounds like you're looking for. So you've got to be in pretty close. And in this case here, for example, I think that mic is about 18 inches from my mouth. If you get in that range, you're going to get a little bit more of that sound. For the lavalier microphones, it depends on the lavalier microphones, and placement is important there. Some people suggest that it's better to have it off to one side because then it captures a little bit more of the high frequency, so you get a broader coverage of the overall sound that's being produced. But we'll wait for your sample files. He actually had a shoot scheduled for Friday, but it looks like it got rescheduled, so we'll come back to that when you have that shoot. Next question is from Edward. He was reading on a forum and said this: what does all this mean from a forum where the topic was supposed to be VR audio, but they were talking about limiters? One person said, I have an H4n, H2n, and an F8, but have used them all. It really does work like I said and is effective at higher bit rates. I think he's talking about the limiters here. There's quite a few tests online and quite a few misplaced negatively from sound devices owners that really didn't do their research. Obviously, I would prefer a bank of 8 accurately linked analog limiters, but that really does bump up the price and size. And someone else responded, still, this looks like a feature that is only there for commercial reasons. And I think this person is referring to limiters. This is an interesting perspective. And he continues on, simple fact is that when you record a mic signal with 24 bits, you don't need a limiter or even a gain control, just a fixed gain setting that ensures that self-noise is 10 decibels or so above quantization noise. That's the noise that you're generally going to pick up in the analog to digital converter, if I understand correctly. Even then, you need an SPL or sound pressure level well above the mic's limit to clip the digital signal. You may end up with a low level in the recording, but recording the same with more gain will not improve the result in any way since it is limited by the performance of the analog parts. For what it's worth, I'd never buy any supposedly pro or even semi-pro gear if there are no full and unambiguous specs available. Well, Edward, I don't have the full context here, so I don't know what they're talking about, but the second person, I assume, is what you're wondering about. This person is essentially suggesting that you don't need a limiter. Technically, in digital recording, you don't need a limiter if you're recording at 24 bits. And I would add, and you have a relatively high quality analog preamplification stage and a relatively high quality analog to digital converter, which these days are not as hard to come by. There are lots of great analog to digital converters out there that are relatively affordable. So I don't, again, know all the context of what they're talking about, but the second person is essentially saying that if you, and I think this is kind of the approach that Sound Devices took, or I heard Paul Isaacs from Sound Devices talking about with regards to the Mix Pre when it was first announced, and I did an interview with him. He said that you don't even have to worry that much about setting the gain perfectly. You can leave yourself a ton of headroom and then just normalize in post because the preamplifier and the analog to digital converter were so clean. So I think that's essentially what this person is saying here. I think that assumes a few things like, number one, you're going to do post-processing on your audio, which may or may not be the case. And certainly in the case of broadcast, that's not an option. So in any case, that's what I think they're talking about. I don't know if there's a specific part of that other than what we talked about here that you were curious about, but overall he's saying, well, what he means when he says that you just need a fixed gain setting that ensures the self noise is 10 decibels or so above quantization noise. I think he's saying is you just need a minimal signal to noise ratio. So it doesn't even have to be, I mean, you can be peaking at minus 40 or, even perhaps lower depending on the quality of the preamplifier and the analog to digital converter. So, and then in post, you can just pull that up. And he's also saying that it doesn't help the situation if you add a lot of gain during the recording, because then you're losing headroom and then you are more likely to need a limiter. So essentially what he's saying is that in most cases with most quality microphones, that you're not going to clip if you leave all that headroom. Say, for example, again, your peak's hitting somewhere around minus 40 decibels, and so you can just normalize it in post. I don't generally work with it that way. If you hand an editor a file like that, video editor, a file like that, where your peaks are at minus 40 or lower, they're going to be frustrated by it, most likely, because they're not necessarily going to know what to do with it. I generally, again, am setting my peaks to hit somewhere in the minus 24 to minus 18 range. And then I've got plenty of headroom left. And very, very rarely on the pieces that I'm working on do we ever even touch the limiters on my Sound Devices 633, on my Mix Pre, on my Zoom F8N, whatever it is. So there are some thoughts there. I would say the takeaway is this. I think that second person is talking more in theoretical terms. Well, not necessarily. I mean, you could approach it like this person is saying. I generally don't find that very useful. I guess I should say this. I don't necessarily find a limiter to be an absolutely positively crucial thing to have in every recording situation. If you know generally what the overall modulation is going to be like during a piece, and you're not going to have people, guffawing and yelling and screaming, then I think hitting your peaks at minus 24 to minus 18 is going to be fine in almost all circumstances, even if you don't have a limiter. So it's a fairly rare circumstance. Now, if you're doing work professionally, recording audio professionally, and you're not always necessarily sure what to expect, having a limiter is a nice thing to have. Is it absolutely crucial for you to make your own passion film? No. Is it really nice to have? Is it a good idea to have when you're doing paid gigs where you're charging $750 a day to be a location sound mixer? Yeah, then it's probably a good idea. Or if you go with the Zaxcom type recorders, they actually go about it a different way. Instead of, I think they do still have limiters, but what they rely on more heavily is an incredibly wide dynamic range. And so they actually have 2 analog to digital converters for each preamplifier. And so they're able to capture something like 137 decibels of range. And so the chances of clipping that is really pretty low. So there are a variety of different approaches. I don't want to create this subculture where people are so obsessed with limiters. It's a tool. They're nice to use. They can help in some circumstances. Are they absolutely critical if you don't have $1,000 to spend on a recorder? No, you can get away without them if you're doing passion projects. If you are getting paid, then you're probably going to want to start looking into ways that you can have a tool like that on hand to help you out in circumstances where you're going in and you don't necessarily know what to expect, and things could get a little crazy. So there's some thoughts. I think that's it for this week. If you have any questions, of course, you're always welcome to email me. And I think I just want to encourage you to get out and make some great sound. We'll talk to you again next week.